Peace and blessings, love and light, and welcome to the How Now podcast, where we talk about how to live in the now. I'm your host, Kim Martin Raymond, and I'm a minister, spiritual life coach, holistic nutritionist, author, and founder of Redefining You LLC. And welcome to tonight's show. If you are new to the show, welcome to the How Now podcast. We are in season 6, where we are talking about this year of execution. Last year, we did a 365-day challenge where we challenged our listeners to create healthy habits, mind, body, and spirit, and put them in their mental, spiritual, and physical toolboxes. And this year is the year of execution. We're looking to see how those things are manifesting in our lives. And so hopefully those of you who have been listening and following along are seeing the manifestation of those things that you put in your toolboxes as I'm seeing them in mine. Today we started with a new intro to my show. So I'm excited about that. And also excited about the fact that I now have a new website, and that website is kimmartinraymond.com. So you'll be able to tune into all things Kim Martin Raymond, my How Now podcast, my spirit body transformation, and all of my products and services are now in one place. That is kimmartinraymond.com. And you'll see that going across the bottom of the screen as we're going through the show. Now, one thing that we're doing in 2026 is we have 4 segments. We have a segment on the 12 spiritual principles with Dr. Reginald Howard, and he takes a spiritual luminary and talks to us about each one of the spiritual principles. And we'll be touching on one spiritual principle during each month of this year. And then we have our financial fitness segment with Leah Garcia, where she talks about ways in which we can become, better stewards of our money and, creating dynasty and legacy for our families. And so that's an exciting segment that we're doing with Leah Garcia. And then we have Spirit Body Transformation, where I'm talking about my wellness journey and talking about physical fitness and talking about ways that we can change our diet and, be better versions of ourselves through our physical fitness. And then finally, we have Living Your Purpose with our guest who will be joining me shortly. Let's go ahead and bring him on stage now. And he is going to be talking about there we go. Talking about living your purpose. And as is customary with the How Now podcast, I'm going to have him introduce himself at this time. And then we'll go ahead and talk about tonight's subject. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Kim. It's great to be here. Great to be with this community. It's been an amazing. We're on 6 months already. Whew. Yeah. So my name is Jason Jurado. I am the owner operator of One Path. It is now One Path Healing, which is more aligned in who I am. I've been a healer since I was a little guy. It's kind of was my calling, and I'm blessed enough to where my calling, career, and my purpose all align. So I have my own business. I see clients one-on-one. I do talks. I'm a speaker, things of that nature. With One Path Healing, I see clients usually one-on-one, virtually. And like this, that's kind of how it goes. I do have a new client that just started in person. That's always fun to get back to, that connection. So yeah, I've always been into this. My background is I'm a master practitioner of neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, timeline therapy, polyvagal theory, mindfulness, and meditation. Sounds like a lot, but it's just it's several modalities that all kind of combined. It's all pieces of a puzzle. It's not let's see what works. This was really thought out. This is all these modalities are things that I really, thought about and sat down and said, does this make sense? Does this call to me? Is this going to help me on my mission and on live my purpose? And some things I was like, that's kind of interesting, but it didn't fit. So I stepped away. So it's been curtailed. And right now that's kind of where I'm at. A little shamanic learnings are on the way, but I'm just excited to be here tonight.
Yes, I'm glad that you're here too. And like you said, living your purpose. And that's what we're doing. And that's what it's all about in this year of execution, living your purpose and finding out which ways, we can be better versions of ourselves. And that's through creating those healthy habits. So again, I'm so glad that you're here sharing space with me. And it's just been a wonderful ride for these 6 months. And I'm looking forward to the next 6 months and beyond.
Yes.
Anyway, what are we going to be talking about this evening as we've been talking about your bridge technique and seeing where we are in the process so far?
Right. So the bridge technique is it came about where, for those that have been with us, you've heard the story. I'm going to say it just again quickly for those that are joining us maybe now. I was working on my business and working on my, kind of how I'm going to present myself to people and to potential clients, et cetera. You kind of thinking about, how you show up to get the people that you need to get to show up for you. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and she was having some challenges. She was kind of in her own mental situation, her mental health was going on in a different direction. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to help people kind of live their purpose and, find their purpose and live it with passion. And she was like, I can't even hear what you're saying. And I was like, what? And she's like, though that where I'm at in my life right now, that just doesn't even make sense to me. I can't even imagine thinking about finding a purpose and living it with passion. And so took a step back, and it's all about meeting people where they're at. I knew that, but it didn't strike me until this conversation. And so it was like taking people from where they're at to where they want to go, discovering where they're at, discovering where they want to go, and helping them get there. And so I came up with the acronym of BRIDGE. I just thought it was very fitting to get from one place to another. And we've been talking so far, we've talked about B.R.I.D.G.E. We're going to talk about G tonight. I'll go back for a second, but I do want to say this because it's very funny, Kim. I love you and I love being on this show. You're an amazing person and I love the show. And the fun part about doing the show with you is that we get the opportunity, I think, every time to really walk the walk, to really live what we're talking about, to talk, I every time that we do a show, or anytime I do a podcast or a presentation, I'm very aware of telling people, hey, we're not saying this is easy. Hey, this could be challenging, start where you're at and things of that nature. Because sometimes, when you listen to people that are the so-called experts, they can sound like, oh, well, it's easy to them and they don't have the challenges I do. We all have challenges. We've all been through this stuff. And so I make sure I say that. Well, like I said, we like to joke and laugh for sure. That's one of the reasons I think we connect, is that's one of high up in our values. But it's interesting where something will, let's say, not go according to plan. And we have the opportunity to say, okay, it didn't go according to plan, and we move through it. And whether it's on my side or your side or our side, there's always a challenge. And I will say this, the reason I brought that up is just because I think it's very important for people to know we're not here to say, hey, all this works easy. Life can be a challenge, but also to say, when you start this journey, when you get on your bridge, remember, comfort is not always going to be your friend.
That's right.
Things are going to show up that you're not used to. Things are going to happen that's going to be like, what is going on? One of my teachers used to say, do you want to be just man floating in lukewarm water where life's just good enough and it's just not bothering you enough? Or do you want to go out and do you want to change things and make things better? And when you go out of your comfort zone, that's where change happens. But remember, it's also where things are going to come at you that you're not ready for, or not used to, rather. Not so much not ready for, but you're not used to. So it's very important to realize that. Hey, because sometimes it takes a lot of courage to take these steps, right? And you might take these steps and get smacked and be like, what was that? Just know that is part of the process. And it's not necessarily going to happen, but it can happen. And you have to be willing to step into that and say, you know what? I don't know all this, and that's okay. That's when you start a new process. You have to say, okay, I don't know everything. Like in Buddhism, we talk about the beginner's mind. Having a beginner's mind, having a mind like a child, and just looking for wonder, and just say, what's going to show up. And so with that said, I'll start, a little recap for all of us here. So the bridge technique, the B is be aware of your current situation. So many times we can talk about what we don't want in this life, but then it's like, well, what do you want? Well, wait a minute. In order to know what you do want, you have to know where you're at. You can't say, I just want more, or I want less, or I want, you have to be specific and say, okay, so where am I at currently in my life? Honestly, a lot of times we fool ourselves and we're like, oh no, things aren't too bad. well, things are all right. Things are, but then you stop and go, wait a minute, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I want to do. And there's times in life, we all have to make, we have to step back and go, is this really where I'm going to go?
That's right.
And so we start with that your current situation, recognizing where you are honestly with self-compassion. Okay. Then there's the R. And this is kind of the big first, this is the second step, and it's kind of a big one. This is when I work with clients, what we get to really get started on. I just started with a new client today, and we're kind of getting to this process. You want to remove limiting beliefs and negative emotions from the past that are holding you back. So once you realize where you're at, you start thinking about where you want to go and say, okay, well, what's stopping me from being there? That's the R. So you want to remove those limiting beliefs, remove those negative emotions from your past that are affecting you in a negative way currently. Then we step into the I. And once again, I'm just giving an overview for those. Please go back and watch. If you haven't watched the other episodes, watch the episodes. We go in deep dives on all this, and it's great conversations. So the
Absolutely.
I, you want to identify your core values and your mission. So your core values are what's important to you, values, and then what's most important to you is core values. So when you look at this life that you're living, what's the most important thing to me? And then also your mission. So what truly matters? What do I want to accomplish? So then once you identify that, then you go to the D, which is design a clear vision and strategy. Okay, so I know where I'm at. I've removed the blocks that are stopping me at this moment. I've identified what's important to me. And now I'm going to design a vision and strategy. So, like goals, right? You're going to start with your goals, start putting those together. And we went through that pretty in depth last episode. We talked about SMART goals and how they look in NLP and different than regular SMART goals. I think that was a good episode. I think there's a lot of good information there, maybe a little bit too much, but
It's
we went pretty in
perfect.
depth. So it was good. And then that brings us to tonight. So you have your goal, right? You design a plan to get to where you want to go. Now tonight is the G. And the G is generate momentum and confidence. Okay. So you take that, you start taking those steps, you start moving towards what you want. And you want to build on small successes to create lasting change. Too many times, like when I work with clients, I have to remind them sometimes to celebrate the small wins.
That's right.
We're sometimes our worst critic. Sometimes we're very hard on ourselves. And if we haven't completed the whole thing, we're like, well, I didn't complete the whole thing yet. I'm like, this is the time to brag your butt off. This is the time to say, you know what? I did something differently that's taking me in the direction that I want to go. Right. So it's very important. And that generates momentum, because just imagine if you were coaching a team and the whole time you were telling the team, well, you did okay. You scored a goal. You didn't score 18 goals.
Right.
You didn't score 100 goals, 100 points, whatever it is. Are they going to be motivated? No.
Yeah.
But if you go, great job, you did, and not just you scored a goal, but you did some good offense, you did some good defense. You're starting to make things put things together in a positive way that's going to get us to the goal that we want to get to. Let's celebrate that. And in the moment we think, well, yeah, but that's going to distract us. No, that's going to propel you. That's the key. So that's what gets you. Someone says, hey, great job. If you ever worked in a place, a business, to where someone was a motivator, a true leader, we have managers and we have leaders. We won't get into
Right.
that, but
Right.
someone's a true leader that's, hey, what's going on? How you doing? Checks in with you and then said, oh, I noticed you did this, whatever it is, this one small thing that was positive.
Right.
Hey, I saw this positive. A lot of times in this world, we look at putting out fires. We look at what's wrong. In science, psychology, we call it the negativity bias. We apt to look at what's wrong instead of focus on what's right. I'm saying to get to where you want to go, focus on what you're doing right, and
Right.
not in a false way. You're not saying, oh, well, I guess that's okay. No, it's like, what did you do that was positive?
Right.
Let's step way back. Okay. Talking about living your purpose. That can be a little daunting. Not just to my friend that said I can't even hear you, but just in conversation, we start talking about, hey, what's your purpose? What do you want to do? Living with passion. Well, purpose, that's big.
Right.
I'm going to change the world. No. I've used this example, I think, every show, and I'll use it again. When I
Yes.
wake up in the morning, I have a purpose, getting out of bed, you know, and then I have a purpose feeding my cats. Okay. And then you go from there. And quite honestly, that's a little tongue in cheek, but quite honestly, there are some folks out there in this world that currently getting out of bed is huge for them.
That's right.
Where they're at in their lives, where they're at when they're in their, maybe they have mental illness, maybe their mental health is
Mm,
off. Just getting out of bed, that's a big deal.
that's
You
right.
know, taking a shower could be a big deal for some
That's right.
folks. And I don't discount that. I don't take that away. I'm not here to say, well, that's a start. No. If that's where you're at, that's where you're at.
Right.
And let's support that and let's celebrate that once again, because that's going to generate momentum.
That's right.
Getting out of bed. There was a speech, there was a he might have been a SEAL officer. At the time, he's an admiral, so he's way removed from any of that stuff. But he gave a speech, a graduation speech, and he talked about making your bed, getting up
Mm,
every morning, making his bed. And then a book was made of it. And it just talks about that focus and about having something getting done in the first thing in the morning and having that intention. And that's what we're talking about. So
yeah.
it could be as just as much as that. And I won't say as little as that, because that might not be little to some people that are listening to us
That's
right
right.
now. That might be huge. So it could be just like that. Okay. And then it goes from there for my day. I have to feed the cats. So then my day is, what do I have? Now that all feeds into what my big purpose is. Those are all parts of it. I can't help people live the life that they desire if I'm sleeping in bed, right?
Right.
I just can't. We have a lot of technology, but I guess I could, but not in a very proficient way.
Right.
I couldn't really do that. So what does it take for me to get to that point? And then I start with those steps. So I think that's very important to remember, that generating momentum comes from celebrating those, what some might see as a small win, but are wins. Collect those wins.
Right. And I think it's all about perspective as well, because, you know, and, if for us, it's always about transparency. So, I
Right.
had my oldest daughter when I was 18 years old. I had my second daughter when I was 22. So some people would say, I had my children relatively young. But I never saw my children as a stumbling block, especially my
Right.
my first child. People are like, oh, well, you were a teenage mother. Yes, but at the time I had graduated from college. College. I had graduated from high school a year early. I was working in the school system. So, I was doing some things, and I never, some people would have looked at it and said, oh, you're a girl, or, you're a young girl, and now you have a child. And so what are you going to do? You're not going to be able to do things, are you going to have to go on welfare? Are you going to have to, how are you going to take care of yourself and a child? And, all of these things. And I never looked at my children as a stumbling block, or as oh, now, how am I going to go to college now? I've got this small child. I had my daughter in May. In August, I was in my first year of college. It was not, it propelled me, like you said, it was something that propelled me to move forward. My reason for continuing to go on is, okay, now I have this beautiful child that I brought into this world, and I want to be able to do things for her. I'm going to school. And so I started taking the steps towards, okay, my grandmother was home. She lived around the corner. She was like, I'll take care of the baby while you go to school. So all of the things started falling into place. But it's, I could have just said, oh, well, now that I have a baby, I'm not going to be able to go to school. I'm not going to be able to do the things that I thought I was going to be able to do. And that was never the case. It was always about perspective and saying, okay, no, this is my reason. This has become one of my whys for all the things that I've done. And so, it's really taking a step back, like you said, and doing those small wins, and not seeing things through other people's eyes,
Right.
because of course I think, society is going to make us look at things a certain way, or address things a certain way. And if we choose or agree to accept that, then we begin to live that, and that becomes our truth, and that's not always the way things are. So it definitely goes back to our perspective and our mindset in saying, okay, how do I see this? What lens am I looking at this through, as opposed to someone else's lens? And that, I think, starts from within.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I guarantee that when you started college, it could have been daunting. It could have been like, okay, well, I do have, and I'm not saying I did for you, but just as an example, someone might say in general in that situation might be like, okay, I'm young, I have this
Yeah,
baby, I got these.
right.
But I guarantee, knowing you as I do, that you look for the positive,
Yeah,
and you said, I can, and I know you were like, I can do this,
yeah,
and you take that first step, and it works. You
yeah,
applied, right? You had to find a college, and you applied for a college, and you had to figure out how you're going to pay for the college, and like
right.
everyone, and then you start getting these things lined up, and you take
Mhm.
these steps, which some might be, oh, that's a step, and then some might be like, that's a huge step. It might
Right,
hold people back from accomplishing what they want to accomplish.
right.
But you took those steps, and then it's up to us to be our own cheerleader, to say, yeah,
That's
not to
right.
look external, because you can, if you look external for acceptance, you could be in for a bad day, because
Mhm.
folks have their own agendas, and they have their own reasoning for things. And, something that someone might celebrate, someone will be like, what's that a big deal about? And it's like, well, you're not in my situation.
Right.
You don't understand what that
Right.
means to me. That's very important. And so it's key, as we start these processes, as we get into them, is, to be what I call a self-contained unit.
That's right.
It's good, when I work with a client, and we go through, we do what's called a detailed personal history, and we go through all these questions. Why are you here? And we dig deep. What's the problem? And then we talk about like how your family develops this. How long have you had it? What have you done about? It's detailed. It's only 17 questions, but it really gets to the heart of the
Right.
matter. One of the questions at the back half of the questions is, who is this result for?
Right.
And the result has to be for you. Now, you could have your family, your child, your parents, your spouse in mind. That's great, but it has to be for you. It
Right.
has to be self-contained, where, excuse me, where this goal, you have to have it, because if it's for somebody else, you're going to lose motivation really fast. If it's
Mm.
for someone else, they might not be excited. So you might accomplish something, and you're excited. And if, we may have all gone through this in our lives. Something happens, and you're super excited about it. And you go to a spouse, a
Right.
parent, someone, a close confidant, a friend. You're like, oh my goodness, this happened, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh yeah.
Right.
And if they
Right.
don't match your excitement, it could deflate your balloon really fast.
Yeah.
You could be like, oh, I guess it's not a big deal.
Right.
A long time ago, I learned that lesson, and I said, you know what? I'm okay, because I know that this was a big win for me. So
Right.
if I tell you, and you kind of poo-poo it, that's on
Right.
you. That's
Right.
on you, because I know where I'm going. I have an idea. And so as we go through these things, that's very important, is to have that. Now, having support can be important too.
Right.
Having that, people that are going to be there to support you. But I think the biggest challenge we have as humans is communication.
Yes.
Whether we don't communicate, or we over communicate, or we don't communicate the right things, or that's one of my blessings, is that I consider myself a translator. I listen to conversations, and I could hear what's being said and what's being heard.
Right.
And if it's in my place, I'll step in. Like, I don't think necessarily to say that, because sometimes we won't say that. Sometimes if we're in a conversation, we won't correct somebody because we're being polite. But
Right.
if someone's not hearing what you're saying, then you have to change, right? And fix that, and say, okay, no, here's what I meant. So, and the reason I brought that up is because as you go through these, you go and cross your bridge,
Right.
you have to be able to communicate to folks in your life and say, hey, I really need your support on this.
Right.
Or, the hard one, hey, I really need you to not be negative about this. Because there's some people in your life that are just, we talked about it before, the crabs in the bucket.
That's right.
If you have crabs in a bucket and the crab tries to climb out, the other crabs will grab at him and
And
try to pull
oh,
him
yeah.
back in.
That's right.
And that happens in this life. for whatever reason that happens. You know, misery loves company, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's someone in your life that you love and needs to be in your life and you want them in your life, but they happen to be of that type, we have to have the fortitude to say, I really need you to not bring me down on this. I really need you. You know, what I really need is your support. All this other stuff, feel free to shoot holes in whatever you want, because I know you have good intentions. I know that you just want to protect me and you're just trying to support me in your way. But I'm just telling you, what I need from you
Right.
is support. I need positive support from you on this. So that's very important as we go through this. And then taking the step further, we have to be our own cheerleader too.
That's right.
And we have to just say, hey, you know what? They might not be cheering for me, but I recognize that this is good. Because the interesting thing is, and I'm not trying to talk negative about people in general, because people are good. People want to
No.
support us. We just don't know how sometimes. We don't know how to approach it. But I guarantee when you get to the podium, so to speak, when you've accomplished what you're going to accomplish and you've got your trophy or whatever, you got your flowers,
That's
as
right.
they say, right? You're
That's
getting
right.
recognized.
That's
Those
right.
folks are now going to be like, oh man, I always know you could do it. I knew
Right.
you were going to do it. I was, man, you're the best. Oh, whatever.
Right.
And you're like, okay, where were you steps B through G? You know?
Right. 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 I love that. And you're absolutely right. And, you know, it is huge that we are our biggest cheerleaders. And actually, it takes time to get to that space. It really, and it makes me think, know thyself. I've had to come to a place of doing that because there was a lot of people pleasing. There was a lot of seeking attention. As a young person and being someone who was overweight, I was always seeking acceptance from others because I didn't accept myself. So I was looking
Right.
for, like you said, I was looking for that in other people.
Yeah.
You know, here, take my money and buy candy because that's going to make you be my friend. And,
Right.
all they were doing was talking behind me. Look at the fat girl buying us all the candy, and then she's going to want to eat the candy. It was all those little things that went
Right.
through my mind. But,
Yeah.
we have these experiences and then, it is a process to get to that space of being your biggest cheerleader. And I resonate with that because yes, am I my biggest fan now? Absolutely. Okay, I'm like, yay me. I'm big on that.
Right.
But it took a long time for me to get there and to really start taking those steps to really dig deep, dig within and experience my own truth
Yeah.
because I was really defining myself, not just by the roles that I play. Because I think about when we introduce ourselves to people, the first thing we do is rattle off all the things that we do because
Right.
we're seeking acceptance. Oh,
Yeah.
she went to school. Oh, she's at this. Oh, and we're
Right.
looking for them to say, yay, you on that, instead of just saying,
Yeah.
hi, I'm Kim.
Yeah.
And I love, and I'm, we're here looking, and I'm just such a big lover of this art here. Isn't this great? Are you enjoying yourself? You know, instead of saying, I'm Kim, I'm a mom, I'm wife, I'm this, all right, instead of just rattling off a checklist, it's like getting to that place where you say, okay, who are you? And who is this person? And to me, it's all about that self-reflection.
Right.
I'm looking and seeking within so that way, again, like I said earlier, I'm trying to see through my own lens. I'm trying to look through my glasses. It's very difficult when, both of us wear glasses. I know if I put on your glasses, I'm going to see something totally different. If you put on mine, look, I hope that everything doesn't look all blurry and everything. You're like, oh my gosh, you can't see where you need a seeing eye dog. What are you doing? You actually can see through those things. But just to, like tongue in cheek, just to say, think about it that way. If we want to take
Yeah.
it real basic, I can't. I'm not going to see things through your glasses the way you see things through your glasses, and you're not
Right.
going to see things through mine that same way. So it's a matter of let me put on my lenses. I need to do what's going to help me to be able to see clearly, and I
Right.
can't do that wearing anybody else's glasses.
Yeah.
What's that for?
That's so
I
true.
like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I was thinking about, well, one of the things that we're talking about in different ways, but I'm going to put a
Yes.
label on it, is
Yes.
self-confidence.
Yes.
And let me just say this, self-confidence is a muscle and you have to exercise it. And I'll just tell you, for whatever reason, I've been in the gym a long time, and so people might look at me and go, "Oh, you got it together," or whatever, and I'm like, "Yeah." It took those days, and it took those gym days, took those 5 a.m. gym days, as they, as to stick with that metaphor, to
Yes.
get to this point.
Yes.
You were talking about people asking who you are, and just a quick story reminded me. I'm involved in my community. I was on the Chamber of Commerce, and I volunteer in different groups, and I do stuff, and I I can either be in charge, or I can sit back and just,
Right.
have someone tell me what to do. I'm comfortable either. That
Right.
also comes from self-confidence. I don't
Exactly.
have to be at the front. I don't have to be the one. You say, "Hey, Jason, we need you to give a speech for 15 minutes about this," and I'm your guy. I'm there,
Right.
I'm okay, let's do it. Or you
Right.
could say, "Hey, we're going to have these 5 people talking. We just need you to sit in the audience and support them and clap and whatever." Okay, good.
Right.
Through this process, I remember one time, and I can't remember the exact incident, what we were doing, but I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people and a lot of things that was in this community that we were working in. We were volunteering. I think my wife and I were volunteering for something. And it just so happened that there was like 3 groups that came together, and I
Mhm.
had experience with all 3 groups. I had worked to some extent with each of the 3 groups. But I was just there. I didn't say just, I was there volunteering with my wife, and we were there to support these magazine organizations.
Right.
And people were asking questions about things, and I had the answer because I just had worked with them. So I was like, "Oh, well, it's this and this, or you want to talk to this person, or you want ever," and just getting involved at the level that I could. It was like it's like a day off for me. I
Right.
wasn't working per se,
Right.
but I wanted to help, and so I was answering questions and stuff. And someone was like, "Who?" Not in a negative way. They were like, "Who are you?" Like they were looking for, "What's your role? What's your position?" Whatever. And I said, "I'm
Right.
just Jason. I'm
Right.
just Jason. I'm just
Right.
here." And they were like,
Right.
"Oh, okay, but are you with these organizations or what?" And I was like,
Right.
"No, I'm just here helping out." And I just happened to, and I explained, I've worked with these organizations before and stuff. I'm not anybody with anyone. I'm just Jason,
Right.
you know,
That's right.
and that's a level of confidence. And I'm not saying, "Well, look at me, I'm doing it right," but for my example, for myself, that's where I want to be.
That's right.
Removing the ego, just being present and being able to
Right.
say, "I'm confident enough." You know, that's what this comes from. A lot of times when we're not confident, we downplay ourselves because we're
Absolutely.
afraid that someone else is going to say, "Oh, well, you didn't do anything." So
Right.
you don't toot your own horn. Well,
Right.
one, because we don't want to be cocky. Goodness forbid it's all you're cocky, and it's like, "No, I'm confident." And I
Right.
know it's an old saying, but there's truth in that if you really peel away the layers of that. That's very true. And so you have to be ready to celebrate yourself
Right.
as you're on this journey. You know, celebrate what you've accomplished, whatever level it is. And so now we're going to shift gears a little bit. Okay, so we talked about that, be your own cheerleader. That so another part of generating momentum and confidence is you have to shed what didn't work. So you're on this journey now, and you're moving along forward, and you started with a plan, and you had a strategy, and you have tactics, and you're moving forward. But at this point, yes, celebrate the wins, and
Right.
also be honest with yourself about what's not working, and shed what's not working. Let it
Yeah.
go. That's so important.
Yeah. I like that. And as that's true. Just like when they say you know better, you do better. I know it's cliche to say that when you know better, but sometimes we do. We learn and we've been conditioned to learn or to do things one way, or we say, "Oh, I think that's going to be the way it's going to work," and then we're too proud to say, "Ooh, it didn't quite work the way I thought it was going to work." So
Mm,
yeah, and then like you said, with that self confidence, also comes that same muscle that says, "Okay, if it doesn't work, I have to be honest with myself
right.
and be able to say, okay, well, I took a I took a misstep, or I thought this was going to work, and now, I want to use that same energy to go in a different direction that's going to help me to get to my goal, and not just say, well, no, I'm going to keep going this way
Right.
because I started going this way, and people are going to say something if I go. So do you become like the flight of the wildebeest? So you just jump off the cliff with everybody else because everybody else is jumping? I'm gonna be
Right.
like, whoa, 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 why are we jumping?
Yeah.
What's down there? Now I think I'm gonna go back the other way. I thought it was a good idea to follow everybody this way, but now I think I need
Right.
to turn around and go back because that doesn't
Right.
look like that's a smart thing to do. But I think sometimes what happens is pride gets in the way,
Right.
where we say, "Oh no, I'm just going to keep on going this way, even though I know it's wrong. I'm going to keep going this way because I'm trying to save face." And you're doing yourself a disservice when you do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
then so shedding what didn't work, but guess what? That also means doing more of what does work. And here's the caveat that I wrote down when I wrote that down. I said doing more of what does work, not just what you like. Okay.
Mm,
So we all have these plans. We all have this. We're moving forward. We're doing that. We've celebrated. We got some wins. We're taking action towards our goal. That's the nutshell, right? We're taking action towards our goal. As business owners, we know there's parts of our business that we really enjoy. There's parts of
yes.
our business we don't care for. But guess
Right.
what? They both need energy. They both
That's
need our
right.
time and attention. So same way with any goal. You have a goal, you know, you do have to identify what's not working, get rid of it, shift, doing more of what does work. Oh, this is working for me. Let's take more of that, and not just what you like. Not just be honest with yourself. Yes, this is moving me forward. This is moving me towards my goal. Not, well, it's kind of working, but I really enjoy doing this. There's a time
Right.
and a place for that. That's called leisure, and the reality is that getting a goal doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be rough times. It can be fun. It should be fun. You
Right.
know, moving towards something that's going to change your life in a positive way. If when you get to this point of the bridge, we're almost to the other side now. This
Right.
is where let's celebrate. Let's have some fun. You know, you might have been stagnant in your life. Like I mentioned earlier, you might have had struggles getting out of bed. You might
Yeah.
have challenges taking a shower or a bath. You might have been in that place. Through this now, we're moving. And I don't make light of mental illness. I don't make light of
Right.
that. There
Right.
are situations that you might need, see a psychiatrist, get medication. There's stuff that is going on that's deeper than. I'm not saying, well, just set a goal and get off the couch and you'll do it. I am not saying that. With all the compassion and love in my heart, I'm not saying that. There are situations that people need deeper help than just setting a goal. Okay. This
Mm,
bridge technique is for those folks that are a little bit on the other side of that. Okay. But when you get to the other side of that, through whatever assistance you need, then you start. And as you go, it builds into it. It builds into it where you're like, man, I'm enjoying myself again. I'm
right.
having fun again. I'm doing something for me. A lot of times we sacrifice us for security or implied security. And that might mean working at a job that you don't like because you're getting that check and you're feeding your family. And guess what? God bless you. You're doing what you need to do in that moment. And that's what we all have to do. We have to do what we do. And there's might be a time where you can shift and say, you know what, that's I'm going to do something different. Or it doesn't have to be either or. It could be and, right?
Okay.
So a lot of folks, and I highly recommend this, if you're going to do something, you're going to start your own business, you're going to do something endeavor, taking that leap of faith can be a challenge where it's just going to happen. You got to be smart. You have to be able to say, like in my situation, I had a savings built up. I had a spouse that had a really good paying job that
Right.
allowed me, and even with all of that, it still was a leap of faith. It
Right.
still was. I've been full time in my business coming up on 5 years,
Yeah.
and it's not all peaches and cream. It's
Right.
not just people throwing me free money all the time.
Right.
I this is my job. This is my employment. I love
Right.
it. I'm passionate about it. I enjoy getting up every morning and who am I going to work with today? What do I get to do today? What it's not necessity. Oh, I have to get up. I have to work. I have to. It's like I get to go and have fun. I get to see clients. I get to help people on their journeys. And if you get to that mindset, things really change.
Yes.
Within that, there's things. that you enjoy doing, like I said, I'll go back to that real quick, that you enjoy doing that might take up too much of your time. I worked with a marketing coach and she's like, let's look at what you're doing with your time. And it wasn't a negative, it just was, that was part of her process.
Right.
And, I've actually worked with two coaches, a marketing coach and then a coach from a business coach about that. And they said, let's look at where you're putting your time. And you start to see, wait a minute, I'm spending a lot of time on social media and I don't really
Right.
need that. It's not giving me the results that I'm looking for. There is time for it and you do
Right.
need it. And it did help me get to where I'm at in my business. Don't get me wrong, but it became a default. And it's
Mm,
like, no, I have to post twice a day, every day, and I have to do this and this. And it was like, is that giving you the result that you want? Same way
right.
with any goal in this. So when you're generating that momentum, taking action towards your goal, just keep your eyes open to what's keeping you from achieving it and what's helping you get to where you're trying to go.
Yeah. I mean, it's a like you said, with anything, it's a process. And like you said, that G is talking about generating momentum.
Yeah.
You have to. There has to be some trajectory, and I think what slows us down sometimes is just we get real comfortable with being comfortable. You
Right.
know, this is just feels so nice and cozy here. I can just coast for a while. I don't have to think too hard. I don't have to do too much. So I'm just going to stay right here. But if you don't put your foot on the gas in the car, how far are you going?
Right.
You're
Right.
just sitting in the car, the engine is going and everything else. Like you got everything, you got your seatbelt on, and you don't put your foot on the gas. How far are you going to get? If you're not, what is motivating you to put your foot on that gas and apply pressure to it so that you can at least start moving, even if it's just a little bit,
Right.
and I think sometimes that's where we get stuck. We get comfortable being comfortable, and we don't generate that momentum. And again, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and it all keeps coming back to us.
Right.
All keeps coming back to what's going on within.
Yeah.
And so, I'm loving that we're having this conversation and that we're talking about, to celebrate those wins and to identify those things. All of those things, are requiring us again to take that deeper dive into us. And
Right.
that's where it all starts.
Yeah. And, you were talking about being comfortable, I don't, it comes up, but I don't talk about it from the get go, like when I introduce myself, but I am a Marine Corps veteran, US Marine Corps
Yes.
veteran. And, people talk about the upside to veterans and working with veterans and our mindsets and stuff like that. And one of the things about most veterans is that we were taught to be very comfortable being uncomfortable.
Mm,
And so for this situation, I'm not saying that's what's needed, but
right,
that is one of the attributes of most veterans is that we're very comfortable being uncomfortable. We're used to struggle, we're used to strife, we're used to sacrifice. So when it comes up, it's like, okay, here it
right,
comes again. There's an acronym, I can't say it on here, but it ends with here it comes again.
right,
But so when you're going through this process, though, you don't have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. But like you said, moving off of comfort
right,
is important.
right,
You don't have to be uncomfortable or be uncomfortable, but you have to understand that my Southern friends used to say, you don't get lucky sitting in the shade,
right.
you know? And so that's the reality. You got to get up and do something. So if you keep doing what you're doing, you're not going to get different results, right?
Right.
So you got to move into that. I do want to kind of shift gears because we've had the opportunity through our talks. Sometimes these other letters of the acronym, I've gone a little bit longer, a little more. They've been a little more in depth,
Mhm.
but I do want to mention, since this is our the 6 month, I have two bridges. I
Yes.
originally came up with the original bridge, which we're talking about, excuse me, which is the path to transformation. But it's like when I went from my company switching from one path coaching, which I'm not a coach, that's just what I picked. That's another story for another day, to one path healing, because I'm a healer. That's what I do. And healing's not curing. Just as a real quick shorthand, healing is, to me, healing is coming home. And home
Yeah.
is here. Home is your heart. Home is your spirit. Home is, whether you call it God, creator, source, universe, whatever. It's coming home to that. And that's what healing is. Okay. But I also have the spiritual path to transformation. And that one is, so the path to transformation, I use that because we're talking in general terms, but there are some clients, some people I work with that I feel comfortable with the spiritual path to transformation.
Right.
Obviously, Kim, with who you are and what you do, this gives me the opportunity and the stage to talk more of my spiritual side, because
Yes.
I don't really work with my clients in that too much unless it comes up from them. Then
Right.
we have a conversation about it, and then we might go down that path. But the two things that I'll use as an example. So Michelangelo doing David, I've shared this before, but I'll come back to it.
Right.
So he had this huge piece of marble. Other artists had tried to make something of it. They couldn't do it. He sculpted, David, which is considered
Right.
one of the most beautiful, statues of all time.
Right.
There's two quotes that are both attributed to him. And one was when he asked about, how he took that big piece of marble and made David. And so this is the one I used for the path of transformation. I simply just removed everything that wasn't David,
Right.
and that's for there. Now, on the spiritual path, the quote that I use, and they're both attributed to him, but he says, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free."
Right.
So you can see where there's a little difference and switch in these processes. They're both bridge techniques. They're both getting you from where you are to where you're going. And as an example, and I'll make this kind of very succinct. So we're of course on G. So in the bridge technique for the spiritual path, B is balance your emotions and nervous system, grounding yourself in the present moment. R is reconnecting with your inner wisdom, releasing old patterns by tuning into your intuition, spirit, and unconscious mind. I, imagine a new future. Align with your soul's calling by visualizing what you truly desire at your deepest level. You can see how these are similar, but just enough difference to shift.
Right.
D,
Right.
deepen your self-trust and resilience. So strengthen your ability to navigate life's transition with faith and confidence. And then coming to tonight, we're talking about G. So on the spiritual path, the bridge, the G is grow into your new identity. And that means to embody the mindset and spiritual practices of the person that you are becoming. Okay. So still taking action towards your goal, focusing on what you want, not on what you don't want. Okay. But embody the mindset and spiritual practice of the person you're becoming. So there's two versions of this. There's two different spiritual groups. And one talks about affirmative prayer. And that's basically not, you're not asking for anything. And you could speak to this better than I, but it's not asking for anything that saying it's not there. It's just acknowledging that everything that we want is already there for us.
Right.
And say, I affirm that, because God, if God, and I'm just going to go sideways for a second, if God is in everything, that means everything has the potential. God's in us, God's in everything. And you call that creator, spirit, source, whatever, Gaia, whatever that means to you. But that energy that's in all of us has all potential. So we have all potential. So it's not, when sometimes we pray, we say, well, we want this and we want that. And, well, first of all, spirit's not a vending machine. Spirit's not handing out freebies. So it's just, exactly. It's acknowledging what's there. And then there's also the prayer of assumption. And that's what I'm talking about here. This is like Neville Goddard, New Thought. And what you do is you assume the thing that you want is already happened. We talked about this last week when we were talking about SMART goals, as if, right? You act as if. And that's what this is. So it's saying that, as it says, embody the mindset and spiritual practice of the person you're becoming. So you embody who you would be, who you're going to be, or to the point, who you are when you've achieved this goal. So you start to look and say, okay, when I have this goal, how would I stand? How would I talk? How would I present myself? What would I see in my world? How am I going to be, and what would I going to think when I've achieved what I'm trying to achieve?
Right.
And you approach your world from that standpoint. And just in general, I'm just telling you, if you start to try that, you'll be amazed at how your world just starts to shift.
That is huge. I mean, and that starts with something so simple as the way you walk.
Yeah.
When I come into a room, people are looking like, who is that? Because I'm like, oh yes, you know, I walk in, and 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 it's funny because I've been told that, but that's the way I carry myself because I know that I'm somebody.
Right.
You know, I carry a legacy in my name. You know, I am a Martin first. You know, I'm my daddy's little girl. But but I mean, when I go walking into it, I'm walking in head held high. I'm walking in because yes, I'm somebody,
Right.
and it may be somebody that somebody wants to know. You know, and I've had people come to me and say, you know, who are you? And oh, you know, what's your name? You know,
Right.
do I know you? Because you came in and you were a presence. And that's how we carry ourselves. Like you said, when we had that self confidence and when we gain that momentum, now we go in and we command the room. And it's not anything that we're doing, like you said, out of conceit or out of having a big head. It's just who I am. And so I just walk with that confidence because that's what I know that I'm a child of God.
Right.
And I walk in that, and it's interesting because we are, people look at your body language.
Right.
That's part of the first impression that people have when they see you or when you enter. You know, they can look at you and go, "Oh, I see that person. That person's looking down. That person, they're looking at you to see how you and how is it. Even as you're working within, how are you projecting that on the outside? What is it looking like?
Right.
And just like you're talking about, how will I present myself? How will you present yourself physically? How will you present yourself? When you're speaking, all of those things. So I love that you mentioned that because that is true. How am I going to present all of these wonderful things that are going on inside of me? Because if they're only going on inside my head, and I'm still walking with my head down, and I'm still
Right.
looking nervous, and then nobody's going to see all those wonderful things that you're holding inside.
Yeah.
You know, how are they going to
Yeah.
present?
Yeah. And once again, everything we're talking about takes time. It can take time. It's not simple and it's not
Mhm.
easy. And I'm 54 years old. I've been at this a long time. I was born a healer. I was born a healer in a time, and I'm an empath as well. So I was
Mhm.
born in a time, 1971, where boys don't cry,
Mhm.
suck it up, don't be a little
Right.
this, whatever. And so I know the obstacles, of a world that's not going to show up for you, that you have to show up for yourself and
Right.
figure out yourself.
Right.
And with that said, I'll say this: the biggest mindset shift, you know what, I've had, because of the life that I've lived, I've had this from a very young age, and it's got me through a lot of hard times. But the mindset shift, and one of the spiritual centers that we visited, my wife and I visited one time, they talked about it, and I thought it was great to hear them talking to people about it. But I truly believe this, and this is a mindset, talking about embody the mindset, right?
Right.
Wherever I go, I belong. And
Mm.
I truly believe that. I've been in rooms with multimillionaires, CEOs, whatever, and I've been in rooms with, people that are just struggling to make it work and stuff like that. Wherever I go, I belong. I fit in. And I know this. And I know this at a level to where I have that confidence. I can walk in and I can talk to these folks. And, a lot of times we might be hesitant to talk to people because they're experts in a field.
Right.
People are, whether they're professional athletes and you want to be an athlete, or they're musicians and you want to be a musician, or whatever. It can be kind of a hand in your hat, kind of, oh, hey, ma'am, hey, sir, and I don't discount what they've done. I think it's
Mhm.
because I respect the work that they've
Right.
done and the talent that they have, and I honor that. I can just walk in and it's like, I belong here.
Right.
I'm not less than anyone, but I'm also not more than anyone.
That's right.
We all come from the same source, right? So that helped me a lot, having that mindset. So if you can have that mindset and say, wherever I go, I belong. Maybe you don't fit in a way, but you
Right.
belong. It's
Right.
okay for you to be there.
Right.
Well, not starting there, because that's a leap. But if you get to that point when you're going towards your goal, and you're going towards something new, and it might be intimidating because maybe there's people that have done it before you. You know what? They just blazed the way for you. They're not better than you. They just got there before you. Hey,
Right.
hey, I'm on the same path as you.
That's
We're
right.
connected, you
That's
know?
right.
And so when you start to feel that difference, when you start to feel like, no, I belong, I'm doing this stuff, I now embody what I'm trying to accomplish,
That's right. That's right.
then life opens up for you.
Oh my goodness. Stacey, I love these conversations. I'm loving this bridge because, like you said, it started out as a wall, and as we've been going through the months, it's been slowly coming down
Yeah.
and creating that bridge that we're talking about. And this was just like another wonderful discussion. I hope that those of you who have been following along have been taking copious notes, as I have been. That's why you always see me kind of looking off to the side because I'm sitting here writing notes because there's always something that we can learn. You learn from your womb to your tomb is what I've been told. I was told by a friend years ago. You learn from your womb to your tomb. There's always something that you just when you thought you knew everything, you know nothing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or you need to move into rooms where there are others who know a little bit more than you. Okay,
Yeah.
that sometimes you need to step out of that space, but it's wonderful to be going through this process to see how we're knocking down walls and how we're seeking to be better versions of ourselves by moving that needle just a little hair. It's and that's going to help us to get to the goal of getting to that other side of the bridge, and then knowing that that's not our stopping point. That's just the beginning
Yeah.
of the new adventure that's on the other side. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what we're going to be talking about with that E next month. I want people to be reminded that going across the bottom of the screen during the whole episode is Jason's contact information. So that way, if you want to reach out to him, you can go to www.onepathhealing.com and find out all things that are going on in Jason's now. So I don't want you to forget that. And also remember that I have a new website, KimMartinRaymond.com. Please go there to find out all things that are going on with me. It'll take you to my YouTube channel where you can check out past episodes of our show and of our segments with Living Your Purpose. And go back and check them out and see what he was talking about. So that way you can catch up and then also tune in, for our next segment next month. Okay, so with that, are there any closing words that you want to leave for our listeners before we go?
I'll leave you with this. It's a quote from a mentor of mine. The paradox of life is that you're perfect just as you are, and you're going to get better. So remember that. You're perfect as you are, and you're still getting better. That's the amazing part. I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Jason, for sharing space with me. It's always a pleasure, always fun. And I'm always going to be looking forward to the next time that we get together. And
Yes.
with that, I will say that'll do it for the How Now podcast, where we talk about how to live in the now. And until I see you all the next time, I say peace.